Welcome to NovoEDTalks, where we reveal real-world strategies and expert insights from learning and development professionals. In every episode, we chat with practitioners, course designers, learning strategists, and business leads. We hear about their experiences in the learning industry and predictions for the profession and the trends that they're seeing. But before we get started, a little bit about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoEd is a people-centric, capability-building platform that combines social and collaborative learning to drive performance readiness at scale. Through cohort-based experiences centered around human interaction, NovoEd taps into collective wisdom, placing each learner at the center of perspective, application, and expertise. Large enterprises such as 3M, GE, Marriott International, and Nestle partner with NovoEd to accelerate their critical initiatives, reconnect teams, and achieve rapid alignment through learning that is felt, experienced, and swiftly transformed into impact. Now, let's meet our guest for today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast, a space for training trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fisk. I'm the producer of the NovoEDTalks podcast, and today I am joined by Cassandra Limoges, who is the Manager of Learning and Development at Denny's Restaurants Canada. Cassandra is a people-first learning and development manager with over a decade of experience in hospitality leadership. At Denny's Canada, she leads training across 75 locations, creating engaging, values-driven programs that empower teams and align with business goals. Known for her calm, empathetic leadership style, Cassandra blends strategic insight with genuine care, developing others through innovative learning design, coaching, and operational excellence. She holds certificates in adult education, food safety, and leadership, and is passionate about building confidence and capability in every team she supports. Cassandra, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it. So excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit more about your role, your company, and your background?
Yeah, for sure. So I've actually been in the hospitality industry now for 33 years, and specifically with the company I'm with right now for the last 19 years. And 10 of that was on the floor running with the people. And the last about 9 years has been in this role as manager of learning and development. So I've had to grow into my space. I'm not saying I started and, knew what I needed to know, but I definitely had to grow into who I am as a leader today and had to find my way through that. So absolutely.
That's awesome. I love that. I feel like a lot of folks that we talk to in L&D in general have kind of come about it that way. And honestly, I think it makes them better at what they do. So that's great. Who are some of the learners that you oversee and what are their challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, so we have learners from every kind of leadership role, non-leadership role across the entire company. And of course, it's dependent on what the avenue is that we're going down. So is this leadership growth that we're dealing with, or is it basic job code training? So we kind of touch it on many different avenues. It's a very wide spectrum, and it is very much for us from a brand new employee all the way to multi-unit leaders about how to be adaptable to what these individuals need from us. So that's supplying the tools, the programs, and sometimes it's just about being really face-to-face and looking at the teaching aspect of it, not so much just giving them a program and expecting them to be able to run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the kind of bigger workforce development challenges and how do you approach them like on the ground or face-to-face or given the situation? How are you dealing with that?
I think a lot of the companies right now out there, I know in hospitality specifically, are really trying to balance after we came through COVID, and I brought up the C word. After we went through COVID, it was really difficult to find your way again because we kind of got comfortable with those acceptable shortcuts and the acceptable ways that things were done. And then it was about, we need to shift our mindset because even though we were in survival mode, that's not okay anymore. So for us to be a company that is moving and growing, we have to look at things much differently. So it's about looking at the mindset. And instead of just saying, okay, we're doing it this way, it's about for myself personally and my team, It's about, let's dig into the actual root cause. Let's dig into not just the telling and the doing. Let's dig into root cause. Let's dig into what we need to do to look at this in a bigger way. Because yes, numbers are important. You have to be a profitable company, but that's just the result. It's not the action. You got to focus on the action. And that's one of the biggest challenges, to try and adapt that mindset to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, after the big C word, especially, and the just kind of environment we're living in now, as skill sets needed for success continue to shift very rapidly, and that, if anything, that's what COVID taught us, that we have to be ready to change like that, right? But what strategies does your team use to ensure that your workforce remains kind of like adaptable and prepared for the next big thing? Hopefully it's not a next big COVID thing, but like something along those lines, like for whatever comes next.
Yeah, pretty fortunate. We've had an entire leadership shift in our company, and what I mean by that is everybody from, we've got a director for learning and development. We have a new manager, vice president, president. We've actually had a complete shift. And through that shift, there is always a little sense of grieving because of what you've always known.
Yeah.
However, sometimes the biggest obstacle to growth is that mindset of, but this is the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
And that is one of the worst, I guess, ways to approach any kind of growth, because that's like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over again. You expect something different. So by us going through that entire shift, what we've been able to do is the programs that we've brought, the development on competencies, the development of not just Denny's as a brand, but also the development more so of you as an individual. Because if you focus on this, you're going to get that. So once again, actions versus results. And I think that's some of the biggest strategies that we've kind of started to really approach that, is just a change of leadership, change of mindset, and then being able to introduce some of those other things that help to change the way people think.
That's awesome. And I think that's something like, that's it. Just like recognizing that and like owning that as a company, I feel like is the hardest step, right? And just being like, okay, yes, we've done it this way forever, but we know it's not working. And if we want to, grow and expand, we've got to shift that, and just kind of like owning that is incredible. And kind of passing that throughout the organization is definitely not an easy feat, I'm sure.
It's not. Yeah.
How does your team kind of assess and address skills gaps within the organization?
Well, bringing it back around to the competencies again, it's not about a rating. And
Right.
Because we're so numbers-based, people in the industry are very numbers-based. Sometimes you get caught up in that. Oh, this is what you got on your chat meter. This is what you got on your StairTech. This is what you got on. And then if we get so caught up in that, what we end up doing is we miss the actual opportunity, because it's not about the fact of what they scored on chat meter or on their StairTech or any of that. What it really comes down to is deep development, not just quick fixes. So you can fix it now or fix it forever. So when instead you look past those scores and you kind of dive down, it's about teaching our leaders to think differently. And that will help create that sustainability, that interdependence to grow as a leader, not just someone fixated on trying to get a number.
Right.
Yes.
So important, like understanding the deeper cause of everything. Do you have any, speaking of numbers, do you have any kind of core KPIs that you use to measure the effectiveness of your programs? Or do you keep it, a mix of like KPIs and anecdotal kind of like conversations or things like that? We hear that a lot, but how do you all approach it?
Well, I think with any industry, you have to have measurable stuff. That's truth.
Yeah.
That's truth. And that's just to kind of determine how to move forward, but you don't get caught up on it. So for us, some of the ways that we track it is we have approved training restaurants. So we do assessments, we do action plans. Even more than that, like for an example, with my training restaurants, we have general training managers. And what we'll do is every month they'll submit something called what's going well, or even better if. And we base it off of specifically three pillars, we call them. And those are the systems and standard operating procedures, culture of accountability, and guest obsession. And so what we'll do is they actually lead that call now. So that's a great way to start to really measure where they think they're at. Because there's one thing if I go in and see a snapshot, but it's another thing for them to actually start to track that and being able to measure the effectiveness of digging in deep and making some of those actual changes. And then they start to be that leader because they train all the managers that we bring into the company. So starting there is a great way to track it too, because if those managers who are training can actually pull that and ripple it forward, well, that's a great way to track it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And that's such a great example of, I think, what other people could adapt and like bring to their programs. Do you have a successful case study of maybe this or some other initiative or program that, you can point to and say, yes, that was incredibly successful for our organization as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest one that we've focused on this year is guest obsession. So we've kind of done it in phases. And one thing that we've really had to learn as a company is, for an example, I can teach it at the ground, but what ends up happening is if your multi-unit leadership or your restaurant leadership is not knowledgeable and they don't understand it, it just falls off. So one thing that we've been really focusing on is training the leadership first. So specifically with the guest obsession hospitality, I pulled together not just a PowerPoint with very clear speaking notes or the handouts or, like all of that kind of stuff. Yes. But what I did is I did it in a couple different phases. So the very first one that I did specifically was for the multi-unit leader. So a virtual, meeting with them that was more conversational. Okay. Like I would even pull over the PowerPoint with the speaking notes to show them, because we can't just take for granted that just because somebody is at this level of leadership, that they've had an opportunity to get that kind of training, because sometimes they just don't. And we, if we ask them out of fear of judgment, they may not say anything because they don't want people to assume that they can't do their job. That's not it at all.
Yeah.
So we started with that. We got them to a great level. And then what we did is I had a second workshop for them to take and train their GMs and their restaurant team, and it was just a little tweaked different. And then the third step coming up right now is we also trained the multi-unit leaders, but more one that is very tailored towards job coding that the restaurant leadership team can present out in some of our care meetings or our restaurant rollout meetings. And it's obviously quite reduced in time. But by doing that, that builds that consistency across our restaurant. So from guest satisfaction, improved manager retention, because they feel like they're being developed and they feel like they can contribute, and it gives them that confidence. So
yeah,
it was a win because not just the workshop, it was a win because this is how the leaders are living the message afterwards, and it's consistent. So embedding it in our culture.
I love that. And it kind of just takes that like simple approach, or I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's like learn it, or like read it, write it, like teach it, or something like that. Something along those. I can't remember the exact words, but I feel like that's exactly kind of what that program is doing and making it that much more powerful. So that's awesome that you guys have seen success with that. Switching gears a little bit to the big technology question, what role does technology play in your programs, and how do you leverage tools and platforms to kind of enhance your learning and development programs?
We've always had a sense of technology, especially in my role, but I've had to learn it from ground up because back almost 11 years ago now, of course, like this was something I had to learn this role a lot by myself. And it wasn't until my director came in that she really started, because she's got such an extensive background, to expose us with so many different avenues. And then that opened other doors. So for us, we do have a learning management system. We do have obviously a platform where we can build these programs. And then on top of it, I know personally, myself, my team, we do kind of try to be on top of what is available out there for us. So sometimes it might even be some goofy little things that help us engage our learners, from whether it be, am I allowed to say name, like a trivia nerd or a Kahoot or something like that, to engage the learners differently, because everybody learns different, right?
Right.
And then also, I think the last thing that I've really started to dig in, and you do have to do it with a grain of salt, is stuff like the chat GPT, because at first I was just doing it as a free platform. And it was great, but I found that it very much limited you. So investing in that and the doors that it opens to help you, I guess, connect with some of your learners a different way, because you can type things in because it starts to learn you a little bit, it's doing it based off of my role. And so it's able to actually build some things out that I might not have thought of before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I think it's so great to hear how people are using like even just like the basic like chat GPT and like what they're putting into it is really like, that's really evolved, I feel like in the past year, right? Where it's like
Yes, it
not just
has.
like, oh, it's not doing this. It's like, how do you use it? How do you take like your brain and adapt it to like think like you, like almost training it?
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
definitely come
It's a little
out.
bit scary, but like it's good too. So like I said, when I said a grain
Yeah.
of salt, I I'm very much me too. So I don't want that to be erased.
Yeah.
So somebody from my age group, like you have to get over some of those fears, because I was born in 1972. And technology started to only, I know I'm really dating myself now, but technology only really started to come in when I was in elementary. The first computer came out, so
Yeah. Yeah.
in my role, it's good to and easier to adapt to that. Whereas someone like, other individuals in my family or in my business, they're extremely away from it. My husband, he's like, oh my God, trying to get him into some of this stuff is crazy, because he's never had an opportunity to be around it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of thinking about, some of what you were just talking about, but thinking about it, applied to the industry, like in general, what have you seen, obviously a lot of rapid evolving, in the L&D space over the past 5 years or so, but what are some of the key takeaways that you think you've seen, maybe particularly like in your industry specifically?
Are we talking about in specific to technology or just in general?
Just in general, just with like L&D
Okay.
programs, like in general.
Um, I think for myself, it is um, with the programs and with L&D, you have to really, for me personally, it's about recognizing what comes first always. And why that is so important is because it'd be very easy to continuously just throw people in front of programs and, just kind of hand it over and just, have that expectations, but it just is never the right thing to do. So starting with the people first and build relationships with the individuals, to help you focus on that progress, but it's about understanding them first. And if that means slow down, slow down. It's not just about a quick race. This is a journey, right?
Yeah.
Leadership's not about control. It's about finding ways to influence, right? To make people want to do this. And when you allow yourself to build relationships with them and focus on their development, you can also see what they are being put in front of beyond your role. So L&D has an agenda, marketing has an agenda, operations has an agenda, everybody, human resources has an agenda. And if we bombard, people shut down.
Yeah.
Okay, so instead, focus on the who versus what they do. You focus on the development of the individual, be very aware of what they're working on, what they're dealing with, and prioritize, where does this fit in that? And have we embedded it? If we haven't embedded it, you have no right throwing another program at it, because people will dismiss it and they're just going to shut down. So I think that's some of my biggest kind of takeaways, to just, as all of this stuff is coming up, pause.
Yeah.
Pause. Yeah.
I love that. That's so great. And so, I feel like that could be applied to so many like different industries, different professions, parenting even. But just like looking, like taking, what needs to come first and like making a point to make it be that connection, I think is so, so important. Kind of on the flip side of, looking back for the past 5 years, looking forward to like the next 5 years, what do you see as maybe some of the biggest like advancements, whether that's specifically in technology or just in L&D and mentoring kind of in general, that you see coming down the pipe?
Yeah. I think that people are aching for more, but once again, it's about, where are we at? So future and technology is on everybody's mind. For an example, in our company, like we do have a restaurants of the future, where we have an actual team that is kind of out there seeing what is available. And I think for us, as we start to prepare for the next 5 years, ease of operations is top mind. So how do we alleviate all of the extra burdens in the back of the house and have the focuses where they need to be, and not just in front of house, but I'm talking about systems, standard operating procedures. So, providing that, adding technology into our business that enhances that, I think that's a priority. But how do you find that mix that, um, how do you find, I'll share my little story in a second, but how do you find a mix that doesn't take away from what is the very most important thing, our guests, and obviously our people, so it's about how do we find that mix as we keep ourselves on top of what's coming up and how we need to evolve. A great example is I saw a quick video the other day, and I don't know if you've seen them, like the robot waiters.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So I saw a video the other day and I was laughing because the one totally just started short circuiting, and it started whipping all the food at everybody and circling around and, throwing things around. So I get the place. I get that it's about trying to free up labor and all of that kind of stuff. But I know for us personally, it's about how do we still maintain the most important part about what we are as a company and as a brand, but still elevate the experience of our employees and our guests. So no, we're not going to throw people around or food or so.
No, and I think especially in your industry, that is something that I can imagine being very, very challenging. I worked in food and bev for years. And there, and at like higher end establishments where it was like, service was of like, that's what you had to go through, like testing and training and pass a test before you could actually like be on the floor, and there was a point to that though. And it was that, like people are, like going out to eat, like it used to be this way to interact with other people, obviously like it's evolved and, but like, how do you keep that aspect, like you said, and like still bring in technology and things like that, but still like kind of almost in a way, like pay homage to why people like started going out to eat kind of like in the first place. So I can imagine like in this industry in particular, that's a very hard balance.
Well, it's very hard of what we are and what we have grown to be loved as. So we don't want to lose that, but we do want to and know we have to modernize, but where does that exist?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting to think about, especially for your industry. Cassandra, to close on a positive note, this is always my favorite question to ask. What is, especially given, that you very much so evolved into the position that you're in on your journey, but what's the most important lesson that you've learned along the way that you would pass on to someone just starting out on their journey?
I think I've talked a little bit about it, is obviously it's about people first. And the one thing that I really talk about is you gotta be focusing on developing your people and building great relationships. When you do that, that's when you can help influence. And when you do it with genuine, authentic, and care, and sometimes it means pausing, and sometimes having a great human moment. We have an agenda, but you know what, guys? These guys are they've got a lot of stress every single day, whether it is home, work, whatever, and just being human and just saying, hey, how are you today? And indirectly saying, I care. That I think that says a world of things. And for me also, it's about what can I influence? So circle of influence versus circle of concern. Because we can get so caught up in everything that's going all around us, and we try to solve everything. And a lot of people in L&D are problem solvers. We like to get in there and get it done. And sometimes it's about saying, okay, is this in my influence or is this in my concern? Yes, I'm concerned about it, but you know what I can influence? I can influence how I treat people. I can influence how I react to things. I can influence my authentic care. And when I bring it all the way back to that again, I think that has been some of the most important learning that I have had as an individual.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Awesome. Amazing advice. And I love that. Like, I think it is, to your point, like what you were talking about earlier and what you just mentioned is, we want to go and cross the finish line and be able to check it off and be like, oh no, we got it and got it done. But like sometimes it would probably help you get it done faster if you're like, okay, notice that something's not connecting with someone and why, and figure out what that problem is, because that problem might not be able to be recorded in a metric or something like that. So you have to like have that moment to kind of connect with an individual. I love that advice. Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you so much for joining us today on the NovoEDTalks podcast.
Thank you, Melissa. It's been a pleasure meeting you. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NovoEDTalks.